One of the most infuriating things about the media coverage of Sound of Freedom and Tim Ballard, Operation Underground Railroad, all of that, and I'm talking from Red Pilled America to the Mormon Stories podcast, to Vice News, to NBC, to CNN, is that everyone is so focused on one of those three, either Tim Ballard, and actually Jim Caviezel as well. So they're so focused on those things that they are not digging into the real issues. Like I mentioned in the previous video, one of the things that this movie is meant to do is to raise awareness, because most of us have been told that child trafficking is a very rare thing. It doesn't take place often. And there are just so many more issues that are bigger that we need to be focused on. You don't need to be afraid that your child will be trafficked. And anyone who tells you different is some type of right-wing nut conspiracy theorist that you don't need to listen to. This is such a terrible disservice to all of the children in our country right now who are being trafficked. It is terrible that these media outlets are putting that out there. And it just makes me think, is this a bigger thing? Like, who is instructing you to put this out? Because if you can do even a little bit of research, you know that that's not true. You know that there are tens of thousands of kids who are being trafficked every day in the United States of America. So why do they want us to believe that that's not true? Well, let's see what this particular whistleblower has to say. She appeared before Congress in April, and I watched this and I was shocked. I'm actually going to include the entire video below because this is worth sitting down and just listening. There are other whistleblowers there as well. But it's really worth your time to listen to this because I had no idea all of this was going on this way.
Ranking Member Japal and distinguished members of the committee, it is an honor to be here. I thank you for the invitation to share my testimony. My goal is to inspire action to safeguard the lives of migrant children, including the staggering 85,000 that are missing. Today, children will work overnight shifts at slaughterhouses, factories, restaurants to pay their debts to smugglers and traffickers. Today, children will be sold for sex. Today, children will call a hotline to report they are being abused, neglected, and trafficked. And we don't know if they're going to get the help they need. For nearly a decade, unaccompanied children have been suffering in the shadows. And I have to confess, I knew nothing about their suffering until 2021, when I volunteered to help the Biden administration with the crisis at the southern border. As part of Operation Artemis, I was deployed to the Pomona Fairplex Emergency Intake Site in California to help HHS, Office of Refugee Resettlement, reunite children with sponsors in the United States. I thought I was going to help place children in loving homes. Instead, I discovered that children are being trafficked through a sophisticated network that begins with recruiting in home country, smuggling to the US border, and ends when ORR delivers a child to a sponsor. Some sponsors are criminals and traffickers and members of transnational criminal organizations. Some sponsors view children as commodities and assets to be used for earning income. This is why we are witnessing an explosion of labor trafficking. Now, whether it's intentional or not, it could be argued that the United States government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation that is run by bad actors seeking to profit off of the lives of children. As for me, my interest is the safety of the children. I do not view this as a political issue. I view this as a humanitarian issue. I assure you, my motives are the highest and best. I want the children protected. So I want to tell you some of what I witnessed personally at the Pomona Fairplex. I saw vulnerable indigenous children from Guatemala who speak Mayan dialects and cannot speak Spanish. That means they cannot ask for help in English. They cannot ask for help in Spanish. They become captives of their sponsors. I have sat with case managers as they've cried to tell me the horror of what has happened to children as they make the journey to this country. I saw apartment buildings where 20, 30, and 40 unaccompanied minors have been released. I saw sponsors trying to simultaneously sponsor children from multiple ORR sites at one time. I saw sponsors using multiple addresses to obtain sponsorships of children. And I saw numerous cases of children in debt bondage, and the child knew they had to stay with the sponsor until the debt was paid. Realizing that we were not offering the children the American dream, but instead putting them in modern-day slavery with wicked overlords was a terrible revelation. A terrible revelation. These children are a captive victim population with no access to law enforcement or knowledge of their rights. They are extorted, abused, neglected, and that is why I blew the whistle in 2021. I witnessed firsthand the horrors of child trafficking and exploitation. My life will never be the same after what I saw, but I have hope because I'm counting on you. It's my hope that you'll take action to end this crisis, to safeguard the lives of these vulnerable children. People have asked me, what can be done? What would you suggest? Well, first, I think HHS's #1 priority is oversight. They must commit to oversight, transparency, and accountability. If I could wave a magic wand, this, I believe, could be quickly solved by experts in the IG community. There is a Pandemic Analytics Center of Excellence, or the PACE as we call it. I believe if data analysts at the PACE could look at the data, children could be rescued, criminals could be prosecuted if the PACE had access to this data. It shows where the children are and who has them. I think also we need to change the culture of speed over safety. Speed is the wrong performance measure when dealing with children. We need to revamp the vetting process of sponsors and have case managers who have investigative backgrounds, data analytics backgrounds, some certified fraud examiners. And I think we need to reimagine a system where the sponsor is the accountable party. Sponsors should be required to report to ORR. And lastly, stop retaliating against whistleblowers. Stop retaliating against the people who are trying to tell the truth to save the children.
Use the term middleman. Microphone, please.
So the United States government is receiving the children from the smugglers at the border. And HHS is a $2.7 trillion agency, and over the last 2 years has spent approximately $10 billion. So they are using that money to receive those children and then transport those children to the end user.
And when you say end user, we're not talking necessarily even a blood relative. So I heard a Democrat witness talk about vetting. Can any of you talk about vetting? I mean, I could talk about vetting, but I want to hear from the witnesses. Tell us about the vetting that you've observed.
Well, in my personal capacity as the deputy of the federal case management team, vetting, I would like to say, with Mr. Carey, what he said is they are not an investigative organization, nor are they law enforcement. There was no one. I was shocked and I am stunned that there was no one with law enforcement experience overseeing where children are going. You have people applying for children who we know are members of transnational criminal organizations, yet there's no one with any data analytics background or anything like that overseeing this operation. It doesn't really pass the common sense test when we're pumping billions of dollars into a program that's overseen by people who simply are not qualified to do the job. When one individual can sponsor 20 or 30 or 40 people, and no one's asking a question about it, there's something seriously wrong and flawed with that program.
That's ultimately how they found that one child in Yuma, because everybody was going to the same place in Charleston, South Carolina. Ms. Vaughn, you were going to expand on the...
So there we have a volunteer who was working at the border. She saw these horrific things and she thought, the best thing to do is to report it and get some things to change. But instead, what does she face as a whistleblower? Retaliation. And later on, we'll watch the video when she starts talking about that. But we know that there are tons of kids who are coming in. They are being sent to people who we have not vetted. So these sponsors, I mean, like she says, it's very simple. Hold the sponsor accountable. Who is the sponsor? Who are we sending these kids to? Well, once again, I just want to emphasize that the mainstream media says that child trafficking and all that stuff, oh, it happens, but it's rare. Well, we just had a whistleblower share some information with us that's very valuable that tells us that, hey, child trafficking is a problem with kids that are coming over the border. Let's look at a report. Now, remember, the mainstream media is constantly telling us that this isn't happening, and Sound of Freedom is just, it's just, moral panic. Come on. What are you guys talking about? So let's go to NBCnews.com and let's just read some of this article. The title is, Report Finds More Than 340 Migrant Kids Were Sent to Live with Non-Relatives Who Sponsored Other Children. Who are these kids going to live with? Great question. We know that at least 344 in this particular report were going to live with non-family sponsors. And those sponsors were hosting 3 or more unaccompanied kids. So who is placing the minors with these sponsors? Who is vetting the sponsors? It sounds like no one. How are strangers sponsoring children? Well, it's not that hard to do, apparently, because you don't have any vetting. This is another job title that I guess that the cartels have added, sponsor. You can sponsor a kid and then you exploit them for labor. Basically, you get the kids into the country, you sponsor them, and you promise, oh, yeah, I'm going to take care of, it'll be great. They show up at your house, you put them to work either at a factory, like we heard, or you can traffic them in other ways. Sex trafficking is one of the ways that you could traffic them. You collect the money, you say that they have to pay a debt, and you just collect the money that they make. Meanwhile, they're in the country for what they were hoping would be a better life. This is not a better life. And the fact that we don't track after they're placed, there's a phone call that goes through to check on the child about a month after they've been placed. But guess what? 85,000 of those calls go either unanswered or the phone number is disconnected. So that's where the 85,000 number comes from. Now, some of these kids are probably not lost per se, but they are being trafficked for labor or sex. And who knows what else. As I mentioned in the previous report, there is a market for young blood. So if we don't know where these kids are, how can we say that they're not being trafficked for any of these means? We can't. So let's see. The New York Times article that is, I think, probably the first place that states that there's 85,000 kids that came over the southern border in the past few years that are missing. I think that's the first place that I saw it. They started writing these articles in February. And I do have to commend them. They did a good job here because this is a topic that people they're just not talking about. The argument seems to always turn into a political one, but really at the end of the day, there shouldn't be a political argument when it comes to these children. We can have a bigger conversation about the border in general, but I think that it is just reckless and irresponsible to have minors coming across the border and you're shipping them off to people that they don't even know. Here's another stat from the NBC News article. It says that 34,000 children were released to distant relatives or non-relative sponsors. This is dangerous. Some of these distant relatives, the kids don't know. So basically, if you have a cousin that you've never met, you don't even know your aunt or whatever, you can be released to that person. And there's no checking to make sure that they're actually related to you. So these numbers could even be an exaggeration because we really don't know, because we're not testing to find out if the sponsors are actually related when they say that they are distant relatives. So let's dig a little bit more into the numbers. The auditors, they decided to dig deeper into 172 of the 344 cases that they found where it's just completely not a relative, right? And they found that in 12 cases, the children had run away. And then in 12 more, the children were referred to protective services. Now, think about that. So we've got 24 out of the 172 cases. They're saying they either ran away or referred to Child Protective Services. If you know anything about Child Protective Services, this is not really where you want to be going as a kid. You get into the foster system, it's really hard to get out of it. And these are kids who have already been through a grueling experience. So are we doing them any favors by putting them in these bad situations, traumatizing them, and then further traumatizing them by moving them through the foster system? Another point is that our country does not have a system set up where you would be monitoring and checking in on these kids that are coming from other countries that are within the interior. Why? Well, because that's not what you generally have. You have a foster system, but these kids are not part of the foster system. So they fall through the cracks because all that is happening is that you get that call. There's a phone call that's made 30 days after the kid is put with a sponsor. And if the sponsor picks up, great. If they get to talk to the kid, great. But if they don't, then that's just it. They don't have any more responsibility to contact the sponsor or the child. And because so many are coming, you just don't have an infrastructure where you're going to have someone following up. But some people are trying because these are kids and they're like, oh, this is terrible. Some of these kids, they don't speak English or Spanish. They can't communicate. This is not the way to help them. Now, labor officials from the Labor Department, they're saying that since 2018, there has been a 69% increase in the number of children employed in violation of labor laws. Okay, once again, these kids, when they are working these jobs, they're in there working and their sponsors take their money. They are being trafficked. But once again, this is not something that mainstream media is tying to trafficking. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, they're overwhelmed because we know that most of the people that are coming across the southern border into our country are not refugees. They are just looking for a better life, which is something that I think most of us support, but this is the wrong way to come because we don't have infrastructure to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of. And that is exactly what is happening here. These kids are being taken advantage of. So now we're going to listen to a video of testimony of a second whistleblower. And after that, we are going to see how Representative Swalwell, a Democratic representative from California, reacts to the testimony. The reaction that Representative Swalwell has is one of the reasons why I'm questioning exactly what is the plan here and what is the motive behind having the border wide open and letting all of these unaccompanied minors come in. What is the true motive?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, for giving me this opportunity to present my eyewitness testimony and express my concerns regarding what is happening to the children at the southern border because of the current administration's policies. I am Sheena Rodriguez, founder and president of Alliance for a Safe Texas. As a U.S. citizen, mother, and former educator who deeply cares about our country and the welfare of all children, I was compelled to see for myself what was occurring at our southern border. I have been to various parts of the border in Texas and Arizona nearly 36 times in under 2 years. What I have witnessed would and should disgust and terrify every American. In April 2021, when Texas Governor Greg Abbott learned of allegations of abuse of unaccompanied minors in a federal facility in San Antonio, he stated, quote, "The Biden administration is presiding over the abuse of children." He also called on the administration to shut these facilities down. Instead, the administration has only expanded them without communicating with state and local authorities. Local communities are not told how long the minors will be there or where they will go when they are released, and with no concern to the local of impact to the local cities. I am requesting that Congress launch a full investigation into the federal agencies responsible for approving these contracts. These are just a handful of many examples I have encountered. During one border trip to the Del Rio area in December of 2021, the group I was with encountered 6 men who had illegally entered the U.S. and were hiding in the brush. They surrounded our vehicle, believing that we were their transport to smuggle them further into the U.S. When we spoke to them, they said that they had witnessed cartel operatives murder children who were traveling alone and could not pay the smuggling fees. One man claimed he witnessed children being used and traded as currency. In another encounter in La Jolla, I met and spoke with a 10-year-old Honduran girl who arrived by herself carrying only a small piece of paper with handwritten phone numbers on it. She stated the numbers were given to her by a woman in an NGO along the route, who told the young girl the numbers were to her father, who she said that she would be staying with, a man the young girl claimed she had never met or spoken to. Also in La Jolla, I met a 14-year-old girl reportedly abused by her father and claimed that she was held for 11 days in a bodega and abused further. Similarly, she was told by a stranger that she would be going to stay with her mother, who the teen claimed, again, she did not know. I also met teenage boys between the ages of 14 to 17 who claimed cartel operatives often transported children through Mexico and held them at the bodegas where armed cartel members stood guard. Many were told they were going to stay with sponsors in America, with several claims, again, that the teens had never met or personally communicated with their supposed sponsors. Since January 2021, there have been over 356,000 UACs encountered at the southern border, a majority of which have been released into the U.S., more than 10,000 of which that have been released in my respective area of North Texas. The current administration has admitted that they do not keep track of the whereabouts when they are released into the U.S. With the use of taxpayer dollars, tens of thousands of children are simply missing. How many of the missing children are in my city or in yours? This has forced the state of Texas to take actions we never should have had to take as a direct result of the failed federal policies. Currently, we have bipartisan support for my state-level legislative-sponsored letter calling for a state investigation into the trafficking of unaccompanied minors in Texas. I am calling on Congress to investigate the federal agencies responsible for these minors, to locate these children, and to act with urgency to end the policy of releasing UACs in the U.S. with sponsors and non-family members they do not know. I am also calling on Congress to require that all alleged family members undergo a DNA test. The abuse of children is not a political or partisan issue. It is a humanitarian and legal issue. I am calling on Congress to investigate the actions of DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra, and Border Czar Vice President Kamala Harris, and to identify their role in facilitating the abuse of children through federal agencies and demand that they be held accountable. I agree with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who describes what is happening as, quote, effectively the largest human smuggling operation in American history. We can no longer turn a blind eye and pretend that this isn't happening. Congress has the power to stop this, which is why I'm calling on you to do what is right. Americans and these children deserve no less.
Ms. Rodriguez, welcome, and thank you for coming today to testify. Ms. Rodriguez, were you at the Capitol on January 6th?
Was I at the Capitol?
Yes.
No, sir. I was on the premises outside of a reflection pond waving a flag.
So you were on the Capitol grounds?
I'm not sure if that's technically Capitol grounds. I was near the street.
Is this your tweet right behind me at 3:05 on January 6th, 2021?
I really do not know.
Are you at Secure Border TX?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you see that picture?
I can. Mm-hmm.
Did you go any farther than where you were in that picture?
No, sir.
Did you ever cross any police barricades on January 6th?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did you ever see any violence on January 6th?
No, I did not. I did see a red flare go up. I don't remember the time, but that was about it. I did not encounter any violence. As a matter of fact, it was quite peaceful. I was involved in some prayers the day before.
So January 6th, over 150 officers were injured. One lost an eye, one lost a finger, one lost a life, but you didn't see any violence.
No, sir, I did not. That was not my experience.
you agree, though, that violence against police officers took place that day?
Sir, I'm not quite sure what this has to do with the exploitation of children like the young girl who wore this band.
Sure. I guess, you were called, you publicly tweeted this, the majority knew that you were on the Capitol grounds on January 6th. And so, your credibility is, just as every witness, including the Democratic witness, is fair grounds for questioning. And so I guess my question is, you are aware that violence took place at the Capitol on January 6th.
That's what the media says.
Okay. Do you believe the media?
Inherently, I do
No,
not.
about January 6th.
About January 6th, I can only go by my personal experience. And I absolutely, if waving a flag and praying outside of the Supreme Court and standing outside waving a flag on public property is a crime, I'm not quite, again, I'm really not sure what relevance. We have children that are being raped using our taxpayer dollars.
I'm
not quite sure what this has to do with me waving a flag has to do with.
So you were among a crowd that did commit violence. And my question for you is, and I accept you at your word, you did not commit any violence that day. You didn't see any violence that day. Certainly, it's not a lie. It's not made up that 150 officers were injured. But my question is, to your credibility, will you condemn the violence that took place against the officers that day?
I absolutely condemn any violence, including the violence that is occurring at our southern border using our taxpayer dollars. Absolutely.
Okay. And did you tell the majority before they invited you here that you had participated on the Capitol grounds on January 6th?
Did I tell the majority that I waved a flag on?
Did they know that you
grounds?
had been at the Capitol on January 6th?
That was not a question that I was asked. No, sir.
Okay. And as it relates to January 6th, you also posted a tweet that encouraged people to attend that day and, quote, fight for Trump. Do you remember writing on January 1, 2021, imagine over 1 million patriots screaming, fight for Trump. Think Congress and the Supreme Court will hear us. When you say fight for Trump and then there was actually physical fighting on behalf of Trump,
Sir,
what did you mean?
Are you stating that I tweeted that?
You don't remember tweeting?
No, sir, I honestly do not.
Okay, so on January 1, 2021, you sent a tweet that said, imagine over 1 million patriots screaming, quote, fight for Trump on the 6th. Think Congress and SC, which I believe is Supreme Court, will hear us then. Hashtag fight for Trump. Your testimony is that you did not say that.
I'm saying I honestly do not remember tweeting that. I was not very active on Twitter.
Well, you also tweeted at 4 o'clock, I just got home. You said, I just got whole safely. I think you meant home. At BWI Airport is the gate filled up with those of us with Trump gear on and several Army soldiers. Near time to boarding, our gate was surrounded by airport security.
The gentleman yield for a moment?
No, I will not yield. So you tweeted regularly throughout the days leading up to January 6th. You asked people to fight for Trump, and then you took a picture of yourself near the Capitol. So I just want to know, when you say fight for Trump and people ultimately fought for Trump, do you regret those words?
Sir, I do. The second one that you just read, because that was a very traumatic experience. I couldn't understand why my gate surrounding and in BWI was surrounded by guardsmen, and how we as a whole, everyone that was on that plane, were threatened to be removed. I could not understand because, again, I did not experience any type of violence. As far as the first one that I would have to go back and look at that. I really do not honestly remember tweeting that first.
I'll make sure we
Gentleman's time
give it to
has
you.
expired. Mr.
And
Mills.
I just want to correct. I said January 6th for the BWI airport. It was January 7th. I just want to. January 7th was when you tweeted about
Mr.
BWI.
Nels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Rodriguez, I apologize that you're here for a hearing on the border. They don't want to talk about a border. Mr. Swalwell is down there. Obviously, everybody knows he's made some comments. He's got a checkered past. He's alleged relationships.
A checkered past? I would ask.
It's my time.
Mr.
Alleged affairs,
Checkered
relationships
past?
with
No,
with Yum
sir.
Yum.
You don't get to say that shit. That's not
He had
true.
alleged relationships with
And-
Yum Yum.
I asked the gentleman's words to be taken down.
You don't get to say
Mr.
that,
Chairman,
pal.
Yes,
we
the
ask that
gentleman's
the
words be
Okay, so that was infuriating. Representative Swalwell does nothing but talk about January 6, 2021 with this lady. Now, she just presented some really disturbing testimony, but as a representative from California, he has nothing to ask her. He doesn't care about the testimony that she just presented. He is focused on her tweets from 2 years ago and the fact that she was at the Capitol on January 6th. This is something that once again brings up the question. We just talked about how in California, the bill that made child sex trafficking a felony almost was killed by 6 Democrats. Why? Why don't they care about this issue? Now, obviously, we're talking about California, which we know Hollywood is there. Is it possible that the Democrats, especially the ones that represent areas near Hollywood or just the Democrat Party in general in California, is it possible that a lot of them don't want to touch this issue because they are funded in part by people in Hollywood who, there are a few like Woody Allen, Roman Polanski, these people who we know have participated in some type of sex abuse of minors. We know that, but they've never been blacklisted by Hollywood. So I'm sure there are plenty more. And then we have Harvey Weinstein, and we know, he was a predator, but people loved him, right? Everybody was fawning all over him. So is it possible that there are some people, because of their funding and where they're coming from and what the kids that are trafficked mean to their state in different industries, is it possible that they just don't care about this issue? Or maybe it's even darker than that. Maybe they care about it. They care about it enough to make sure that these kids get in the country so that they can be used for labor or sex trafficking or other things. Is that possible? The reason that I bring this up is because the New York Times article, I was shocked. We aren't talking about kids working in, just some obscure sweatshop somewhere. No, we're talking about kids who are making auto parts for Ford and General Motors. They are not just in some little, backwoods sweatshop. They're working for subsidiaries of global corporations. Somebody had to hire them, right? And if it's on this broad scale, I think you have to be getting a pass from the Labor Department. There are child labor laws. So why would you feel comfortable doing that? And then when you get caught, like we saw in the video about the kids at the meatpacking plant, not a whole lot happens. So why is that going on? Is this deeper? Is there some type of deal that the current administration has where they want to show these great job numbers? My question is, how many of those jobs have kids that are 12 and 13 working in them? And if they have that, how much money are these kids being paid? Since they don't get to take home any money, all the money's going to their sponsor, but what are you putting them on the payroll for? I doubt that you are putting the 12-year-old on the payroll for what you pay the adults. These are all questions that I just feel like we all should be asking. And once again, instead of taking down Sound of Freedom, Tim Ballard, Jim Caviezel, or Operation Underground Railroad, why is the media not focused on this? This is an absolute outrage. But it's not just kids that come across the border that go missing. In 2021, 335,000 reports of missing children were sent to the FBI. About 90% of those kids were found. But there are estimates that about 100,000 kids go missing from the foster system, and they're not reported to the FBI. Now, most of those kids return, but because we don't really know exactly how many go missing or how many are reported, what we do know is that a lot of foster kids run away, they're not found, and they age out of the system. So effectively, because they don't have anything on record as an adult, some of these kids just literally vanish. We don't know what happened to them. And this is not just a problem that happened in the 1970s, and a lot of people disappeared, a lot of kids ran away, and Eventually, some of them were identified years later, usually several states away. But there are others who have never been found. And that is still happening today. If a foster kid runs away and is not found before they turn 18 and they age out of the system, then effectively that person, if nobody is looking for them, is just lost. At some point, somebody may stumble upon their name and decide, oh, I wonder what happened to this kid. It might look for them, but there are some kids who they're gone and no one is looking for them. So what happens to them? I think that with all these questions and all of these kids, these tens of thousands of kids who are vanishing in our country, I think it is logical and necessary for us to ask how much child trafficking is happening in our country, and when the children are trafficked, what is happening to them? These are not illogical questions, and the fact that mainstream media is not asking them consistently is very disturbing.